Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today on Unpacking Perfectionism. And today we're really going to cover a lot of different topics under the umbrella of perfectionism, but we're going to be specifically focusing on how unrealistic expectations can lead to academic burnout. So, we broadly will be talking about perfectionism, ways that you can help your clients that are exhibiting some of the signs or tendencies of perfectionism, and then what to look out for and how to support clients that are showing up with some perfectionism tendencies. So, I want to introduce myself. My name is Megan Mitchell, and I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I work in Washington, D.C. So, a little bit about me so you know who is presenting to you today. Why I developed this training, I think it's much needed. I think that there are a lot of people who fall into the umbrella of a perfectionist, and oftentimes they feel alone or they feel misunderstood, or they silently are suffering through it and they're not getting the help that they need. So hopefully this will help you today be able to identify some of the tendencies, signs, symptoms, and be able to walk that journey with your client. So I am a self-proclaimed perfectionist, and for the last few years of my adult life, I have been working on this and through this. However, if you look back farther, the perfectionism tendencies really began probably in high school is when it started to become very clear to myself and to my family. So I will talk a lot today about my personal journey and how perfectionism has touched my life and continues to be part of my life and something that I have to continuously work on. I have been working as a clinical social worker, like I said, in Washington, D.C. since 2015. And I currently am a therapist with children and adolescents, primarily school age, so 5 to 18 ish, some variation in that as well. And I particularly work with children and their families who are neurodivergent. So that is something that is a big passion of mine. I am addicted to learning, I like to say, and you will see as I kind of explain my intro here, I'm a very busy person too. So I am currently working on my doctorate in social work at the University of Buffalo, and some of my interests there include technology and social work, burnout prevention, and I am recently studying expressive arts, and I'm working towards my play therapy certification. So I feel like I have so many interests, and I'm very lucky to have an outlet to be able to learn more. And why I always feel like I'm addicted to learning, I just am very curious, I'm very creative, so I'm always asking questions and wanting to know more. I have called DC home for the last 10 years, so it will be 10 years this upcoming spring. 2013 is when I moved here, but I originally and I grew up in Michigan, and big University of Michigan fan, went there for both my undergrad and graduate degrees. So if I have any fellow Wolverines here, go blue. Other things that I do in my time, I adjunct at the master's level. So I feel that education is something that's very important to me as well. And then I'm also the founder of a social work test prep platform, Agents of Change. So I have my hands in a little bit of everything. Most of my clinical social work was done in schools. So that's why this topic is very important to me, because I saw perfectionism and anxiety come up a lot. I just finished working in the schools after 8 years this January. So making kind of a switch into private practice because I just needed the flexibility, and I'm very busy, so I do that part-time. So that's a little bit about me. And what is our agenda for today? What are we going to cover? So I've already done my introduction. The next thing that we will cover is perfectionism, what it is and what it is not. Because people always ask me, well, why is perfectionism necessarily a bad thing? Shouldn't we be striving for high standards? Shouldn't we be pushing ourselves to be our best? We're going to talk about that fine line between perfectionism and high achieving. We will link perfectionism to academics, what kind of leads to some of those perfectionist tendencies in academics, how in an academic setting we can spot some of the signs and symptoms. We will move into coping strategies, moving from perfect to good enough. That is a big mindset shift that we will be focusing on with perfectionism. So not everything's going to be perfect because we know perfect is unattainable. So how can we move people with this mindset to think good enough is okay with me? And then we will wrap up and I will do some logistics at the end regarding CEUs. So who can benefit from this session? Really, anybody can benefit from this session. You might just have an interest in the topic or you're wanting to grow your skills in this area. But particularly who can benefit? Clinicians who work in an academic setting. So this could be if you work in a school setting, if you work at a university level, if you work in higher education, anywhere where you are interacting with learners. So that is one place that you might see clinicians working in academic settings. Clinicians who work with students. So this could be you're not necessarily in an academic setting, but maybe you're in private practice or you're in a community-based agency and you work with someone that is school-aged, right? They are, a lot of times they're students, or you might be working with adult learners or adult students. And then lastly, clinicians just wanting to deepen their understanding of perfectionism. Or some people take this topic or they're interested in this topic because they themselves might be battling some of these perfectionist tendencies and want some strategies to push forward and show some self-compassion. So whatever reason why you're here, welcome, and I'm excited to dive into this topic with you a little bit further today. Okay, here are our learning objectives. There are 5 of them. The first is to understand the concept and traits of perfectionism and its impact on academic and professional success. 2, recognize the signs and symptoms of academic burnout in clients. 3, learn strategies for addressing perfectionist thinking and unrealistic expectations in clients with a focus on moving from perfection to progress. So that's going to be an overarching theme today. How can we help our clients move from perfect to progress? So focusing more on the journey rather than the outward product that they deliver. The 4th is to develop skills for promoting healthy coping mechanisms and resilience. How can we teach our clients, work with our clients to develop these coping mechanisms, and how can we help them be more resilient? 5, examine the role of mental health providers in helping clients overcome perfectionism and preventing burnout, because burnout oftentimes parallels and works very close with perfectionism, and they oftentimes can be actually intertwined. So there's a lot of folks who experience burnout in regards to perfectionism. So what are some common traits of perfectionism? And this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some things that usually are kind of the common features of someone that has perfectionist traits. The first is fear of failure. So wanting to succeed at the highest level, right? And what they find is failure is not what everyone else would think is failure. Failure to them could be not being perfect, right? So failure of not being perfect, failure of letting themselves down, failure of letting others down. The second, this is a very common thinking pattern that people with perfectionism get into, and that's all or nothing thinking. So this is either I'm the best at something or I'm absolutely awful, I'm horrible at it. There's no in between, right? So they believe if I don't get 100% on something, or if I'm not the best at this, if I'm not number 1 in my class, then I'm an absolute failure, right? So it's that all or nothing thinking, very rigid thinking, and very little in between or middle ground there. The third trait is hyperfixation on mistakes. So ruminating and obsessing over mistakes. So they might get a paper back and they scored a 95 out of 100. And instead of being pleased with the 95% A grade, it's what happened? Why did I get those 5 points off? And then getting the feedback and not seeing the positive things that they were able to contribute to that paper or that assignment or that task, but really beating themselves over the mistakes that they made. The 4th is an intense sense of competitiveness. This is becoming more and more prevalent now that social media is a part of our teens and adolescents' lives, right? The the need to be the top of the class or the best athlete, this intense sense that I have to be number one, is definitely something that we see with those who have perfectionist tendencies. The fifth is excessive effort spent on a task. And we are not talking about putting a lot of effort forth on a task. We're talking about excessive amounts of time that go beyond what would be expected. So maybe they are studying for a test for hundreds of hours to ensure that they are going to be the best at it or get the best grade possible. And we'll talk about what that looks like a little bit more as we dive a little bit deeper. So you will see that I have citations throughout. There will also be a citation list at the end if you are looking to dive a little bit deeper on your own, or you want to learn more or look at some of these studies that are identified with throughout the presentation today. So what is perfectionism? Perfectionism is a personality trait characterized by high standards, rigid expectations, and specific ideas about how to achieve a desired outcome. So those high standards, they're often unattainable standards because they are always striving for the best, no mistakes, and we know that perfection is not possible. So it really becomes a very negative cycle. Rigid expectations, we talked about that black and white thinking. There's really no in between. There's no gray area. Either I am the best at something or I'm terrible. And a lot of times they see their worth in the output that they put. So if they're an athlete, and they get second place, right, they feel like they're a failure, right? What's even the purpose? I was not the best at what I set out to do. Specific ideas about how to achieve a desired outcome, and that's usually those unrealistic ideas that they have about achieving the absolute best, perfect, no mistakes. A perfectionist has excessively high personal standards and are overly critical of themselves. So they have overly critical self-evaluations. So oftentimes you might see a lot of shame here, a lot of negative self-talk, and a lot of times they might not even be showing this on the outside because a lot of that negative self-talk is mental. So they feel like they are a disappointment. They're letting themselves down. They're letting others down. But they are oftentimes very self-critical, and that's kind of where that self-doubt starts to creep in. And that might be an area that we need to work on with our clients, is helping them switch that mindset, because we know that feelings are not facts. That's what I always like to tell my clients and myself. Feelings are not facts. So this is a question I often get. Why is perfectionism necessarily negative? Like, shouldn't we be pushing ourselves to be great? There is a very fine line between high achieving and perfectionism. So what is the difference? A high achiever, so that's someone that's striving for high goals. They have high expectations for themselves. They can strive for excellence and be okay with room for growth, because it provides them with the opportunity to learn. So they understand they have high expectations, but they understand that it's all part of the growth process. And when they do make mistakes, it's a learning opportunity. Their goals and behaviors often don't interfere with everyday functioning. So they might have these high goals. They might be disappointed if they don't reach the goal, but it's not affecting their ability to engage with peers. It's not affecting their sleep. It's not affecting their appetite. It's not affecting their overall mood. A perfectionist, it's farther than what is seen with a high achiever. A perfectionist is consumed with the desire to achieve, and they tend to beat themselves up over any mistake. So like I said, someone that got a 95 out of 100, they're really wondering, what did I do wrong? I'm a failure. I got 5 points off. How could I do that? They are often not satisfied with their work. Even if it's the best thing they put out, they're often not satisfied, and they make efforts to ensure their work is perfect. This might be starting over on tasks. It might be if it's a painter or someone that does a physical art, right? Starting over constantly or obsessing over little details in the art until it feels perfect to them. And perfectionists, their desire for perfection causes anxiety and distress. And this is usually interfering with everyday function. So we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like, but this could be sleep is problematic. They might be experiencing burnout. They might be having physical illnesses due to the high level of stress. Depression, anxiety, a variety of different things that is tied to that you know, high desire to find perfection in areas of their life. So, why do people strive for perfection? Like, what drives this motivation? Well, there's a variety of different things. I think that social media plays a very big part now because oftentimes, especially with our teenagers and adolescents, social media creates a very perfect picture sometimes, right? They see these stories, they see these reels, they see these images where people just look so happy and they're just doing amazing things and that their life seems perfect. And we know that teenagers and adolescents, their brains are not fully developed, so they're not able to see the whole picture of things. So they might be comparing themselves to someone they see on social media when we as adults know that, right, that could be filtered or that could be like edited or that could just be one glimpse in someone's life for that one moment. So there's a lot of pressure, I think, a lot of outside pressure to look a certain way, to perform a certain way. And not just on social media, where we'll talk about some of the imaging and some of the messaging that comes out in society, but there is a lot of push towards perfectionism in our society. So we'll dive deeper a little bit with that in just a moment here as well. But why do people usually strive for perfection? Is because they're avoiding, I don't want to say a fear, it could be a fear. They could be fearful of failing or they're avoiding failure because they don't want to feel what it feels like to have that discomfort of not being the best at something. So some thoughts that might go through their head is, what will they think of me? So remember, oftentimes they want to appear a certain way to their peers, to their family, to their social networks. Another thought might be, what if they find out I'm not as great as they think I am? So that's not, now it's not just I'm disappointing myself. I might be disappointing those around me. They expect me to be perfect now. And I will say I've seen this a lot with in high intensity academic settings. Oftentimes, teachers and educators, once a student starts to do really well, if they do, bomb a test and or just not do extremely well on a test, the teacher might say things like, is everything okay? And then it really becomes more pressure on the student because they're like, well, now I've let my teacher down. And they're not able to feel that not being perfect is okay. They sometimes think what people like me is that I'm talented and I'm smart, right? And they like that about themselves. And we want that to be a quality that they like, but we don't want that to be the only quality that they like about themselves. So we want them to see that they are a whole person. Intellectual ability is one part of the whole picture, but they are a student, they are a daughter or a son, they could be a sibling, they could be a friend. There's so many different parts of them that makes them who they are, other than being talented or being smart at a certain thing. And then they sometimes say, I should know how to do this, right? Black and white thinking, like, I I am who I am and I am a high achiever. I am a perfectionist and I should know how to do this. So there's self-shame when they're not able to do something at the highest level. So the fear of failure often feeds into the need for praise because when we are achieving at a very high level, we're usually being praised for it, whether that be in sports and they're getting awards for it, or in school you're getting grades for it, or people are saying, oh, they are the really smart one. They're the smartest in the grade. That feels good to be praised. Compliments feel good. And then it kind of snowballs from there, right? Like, they only are seeking to hear those really positive compliments or that positive praise. So perfectionism in a way becomes a way to gain acceptance from others, right? Love and praise. And a lot of times people that are perfectionists do not like conflict. So they are overcompensating with these different skills, striving for perfection to avoid conflict or to avoid having to feel negative feelings, because at the end of the day it feels good to be great at something, right? We want our clients to feel good about themselves. We want to feed into this positive self-esteem, but we don't like to see the flip side where when they're not good at something they crack and they really have a hard time dealing with that as well. So how does perfectionism tie into mental health, right? We're all here today because we are mental health providers, and mental health we know is super important. So these concepts of perfectionism and mental health, they are definitely tied together. People that have perfectionist tendencies oftentimes can have mental health related diagnoses or challenges. But I do want to preface this by saying just because someone is a perfectionist does not mean they're going to develop automatically some of these things. They're just at a higher risk. They're risk factors for these mental health related challenges. So, perfectionism plays a role in the development and continuation of many mental health conditions, and some of these may include social anxiety. Sometimes they compare themselves to others, and then they have a lot of doubt about being in social situations. They're doubting what they're saying, they're doubting how others are seeing them, and then sometimes they just isolate completely from these social events. High functioning anxiety, I will say nearly all of the clients that I have seen that have perfectionist tendencies do have anxiety as well, because a lot of the feelings and the thoughts around the need to be perfect are anxious thoughts. Obsessive compulsive disorder is sometimes seen, and that can be around a variety of different things. So they might have obsessions over the product that they're producing, and some of the compulsions might be around behaviors around that as well. So I've had some clients that have very ritualistic things around homework, around test time, and they have a very hard time breaking out of some of those obsessive compulsive behaviors. Eating disorders, and that's oftentimes a need for control. So sometimes they restrict food, or their eating becomes very disordered in certain ways. If that's the case, I always like to tell people, if you suspect that there's a nutritional component or a client is struggling with disordered eating, make sure that you obviously loop parents in, but they should be under some sort of medical supervision as well, because we do know that it can be very, very, very serious. Body dysmorphic disorder, depression, and suicidal ideation are also some of the mental health related challenges that could be tied into perfectionism. Okay, so I said that we were going to talk about academics. So this, like I said, you might be in an academic setting, so you might have constant communication with teachers or educators. You might be in a higher education setting, you might be an educator yourself, or you could just work with students and their parents. So what are some tendencies of academic perfectionists? What are some examples that if you're starting to see clients displaying some of these things, that they should maybe be some red flags for you that, let's explore this a little bit more and see what's going on. So some examples: staying up until 3 a.m. trying to construct the perfect sentence. So this could be a paper's due and they have not even gotten past the first sentence because they don't feel that what they're writing to even start it off is good enough, right? Think of how mentally and physically exhausting that would be to spend hours and hours and the only product that you have is one sentence because you're not satisfied with the result. Starting papers over and over again because you don't like your writing. So think of here how we talked about how that excessive amount of time spent on tasks, this would be those type of behaviors that we would see. These are students that oftentimes do not have time to do social things because they have to work on perfecting their work, right? So they might be up all night writing a paper, not because it's not good enough, because they don't see the product as good enough. So they're like, I just need to keep reworking it until it's to my liking. Turning in a paper and immediately going back to your computer to see if you let any mistakes slip by. So what this might look like is submit the paper. Let's say they submit it on Blackboard or some sort of learning management platform. It's submitted, right? It's done. But then they can't move forward and accept that it's done. So they go back and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I put a paper in that has all these mistakes. And then they're ruminating on the mistakes and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I would turn that in. I'm so stupid. I can't believe I made that mistake. I'm going to get a horrible grade. So they're ruminating and kind of obsessing over the product that they did turn in, knowing that if you're turning in a paper, there's going to be feedback that you receive in most cases. Having strong reactions, sadness, shame, anger, if you miss points or did not get a perfect score on an assignment or test. So this was something that definitely happened to me. I'd get a paperback, and if it was anything like short of pretty much 100%, my heart would drop and it almost felt like the blood was draining out of my body. And then I'd start to get teary eyed and then I'd be embarrassed because I'm like, are people looking at me? And can they tell I'm so upset? And this was when I was still getting good grades on things, right? Like what would be considered by society as a good grade. But it caused strong emotional reactions in me. Refusing to turn in an assignment unless it feels absolutely perfect. So some people go the opposite way. They won't even turn in a product because they're like, what's the point of just turning something in just to turn it in? Like, if it's not going to be full points, it's not worth it. So here they might actually be getting low scores, not because the product's not good, because they're not turning anything in. So if that's the case, they definitely need to talk with their teacher, and we have to help them see the process is really important, and that learning is a journey. It's not just about the end product. Obsessing over assignments or projects. And this could be like, I've had clients, and I myself, when I was in school, having dreams and staying up at night thinking about how you are going to approach a project or an assignment. Feeling the need to get the best grade and compare performance to others. We touched on this a little bit, but there's many studies out there that shows that perfectionism is actually on the rise, and that's because academic settings are becoming much more competitive. So schools oftentimes will rank students. There you can get over 4.0 now, and you can take a million AP classes, and it's getting very competitive and very stressful. So we know that college is getting very difficult to get into. It's getting more competitive. You have to have a lot of extracurriculars. You have to have, a well-rounded application. And this is getting to our teens and adolescents. They're feeling like they must be the best to get to that end result. They are, wanting to be the number one in the class, especially when they have those rankings. Like, how do I beat this person or get higher on that ranking list? So what's important is when you're meeting with a client, I always ask them, like, what is your school like? And sometimes they're like, oh, my school's very laid back, like grades aren't important. And then I'll have some that are like, it is very intense. And those two situations give me a lot of information when working with the client, because I can be able to have some material to be able to discuss with them, right? Especially those ones that say it's very intense, I'll say, tell me more about that. And usually a lot comes out from that. So I said that I was going to share a lot of personal antidotes with you, and that's why this topic is so important to me, and I feel the need to tell other professionals about it, because like I said, it's something I still continue to work on even as an adult, but it really became an issue when I was in 10th grade. I probably started many years before, but it started in 10th grade, and the boiling point was really in my 11th grade year, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looked like. So my perfectionism story, there was many red flags. Me and my mom often talk about it now, looking back, like, goodness, thank goodness that we were able to get me some help then, and I could get into therapy to be able to work on some of these skills that I needed to help with balance in my life and with coping techniques. So the first red flag is I had severely interrupted sleep. My sleep schedule was all over the place. And what do I mean by this? Like, I would put off a task because I didn't want to even start it because I knew it was going to be stressful, and I knew it had to be perfect. So I would push it off to the last minute, and then I would stay up all night doing it. And by all night, I don't mean like I was staying up, past midnight. Like, I was staying up until it was time to go to school the next day. And sometimes in my mind, it wasn't even finished yet. And I would ask my mom, can I stay home from school today so I can continue to finish it? And she was like, no, you've already stayed up all night. So my sleep schedule was all over the place, which when you're a teenager, you need sleep. So I was not sleeping. My sleep hygiene was all off. That was a problem. And when I wasn't sleeping, my mom wasn't sleeping. Our whole household was flipped on its head because of my perfectionism tendencies and my need to stay up all night to get the perfect product that in my mind felt like was something worthy of turning in. I obsessed over any grade I received that was not 100%. So I told you, like, I would have a physical reaction. I'd often feel so embarrassed. My face would get hot. I'd get teary. it's almost like my stomach would drop. So what would happen when I would get a grade that I didn't feel was good enough, I'd put an extra effort on my next assignment. So now I maybe was studying 5 hours for this test. Next time I'm going to study 10 hours because there's no way I'm getting any points off. Right. So I was overcompensating and doing basically routines and having these rituals that I thought would make sure that I was getting full credit and full points on everything. Not seeing that by putting in the extra time, I'm losing sleep. I'm not able to hang out with friends. Like, you will start to see that holistically, I was not in a good place. The next thing is the physical symptoms started. So I started having physical symptoms, which included stomach aches, headaches, and overall sickness. That year, I feel like I was sick more than any other, just colds. I had bronchitis that year, which I've never had. My immune system was very, very weak at this time because think of this cycle: a lot of mental energy, a lot of physical energy, and severe lack of sleep, and just a disrupted schedule in general, and stressed out from feeling the pressure of having to keep up with this perfectionism, right? So then I started to actually miss school because I was physically sick and I was tired. So some days I'd have to stay home just to catch up on sleep. And then what happens when you miss school? You have to make up the work, and then the cycle gets even worse. And I started to feel even more overwhelmed. And it was almost like I was digging myself into a hole that I felt like I could not get out of. So, all this to say, what happened from this? My mom was very concerned about this. She kept saying, like, something's got to give, like, what is going on? But I was not having it. I was, 15, 16 years old, and I knew best. No one else could tell me what to do. But what really brought things into clear focus was my mom was called by my teacher, and he asked her to come in. It was a history teacher of mine in high school. And this was after conferences, maybe a month after conferences. And my mom's like, well, we had a great conference. Did you get in trouble? So then I'm anxious. I'm like, why is my teacher wanting to speak with my mom? What's going on? So he called my mom in and he basically explained, your daughter's very bright. I think she has a very good future ahead of her. But I'm really concerned about some of these habits that I'm seeing her have. He said, for example, when she turns in an assignment, most people are turning in 5 pages for their assignment. She's turning in 25 to 35 pages. Like, the amount of work that she's putting in effort wise is significantly more than what's required, what's expected, and what's needed. And he could say, like, he can see that it was starting to affect me, right? Like, she seems sick a lot. Like, sometimes she seems tired or stressed out. I do want to preface this by saying, I always tell this when I talk about perfectionism. We had school awards, right? Which I don't know if they do that anymore, but we had high school senior awards. I was voted most stressed. I do not know why a school would have that be an award that you can win, but that was me. So my classmates knew that I was stressed out all the time, and I think of that like often. I'm like, how was that an award? And of course I was the one that won most stressed. It just, of course. So my teacher and my mom were talking it out. They both agreed that this was becoming a major problem. It was affecting my life. It was affecting my happiness. And my teacher said, I actually think she would probably be doing better performing if she was not putting in all of this effort, because holistically she's missing out on other parts. So he said, I really think that she should see someone. And he had someone that he recommended that focused on academic perfectionism. And that's when I started therapy. So, and my mom was totally on board, which is great. And I started to see her to work on some of these perfectionist techniques. A lot of CBT work was done and a lot of just changing my mindset. And it really helped. It does not mean I'm cured. I don't like to use that word, but I still struggle with this even as an adult in my career. I'm in school now, but I'm much more aware of it now. Like, I'm much more aware of what it looks like for me. And I say all of this because it's so important that we work as a team. Because if we're working with young children, adolescents, teenagers, even college students, we're part of a team, right? The professors, the teachers, they all need to make sure that we're kind of honing in on some of these red flags so we can get the students and our clients the help that they need. So changing your mindset, moving from perfection to progress. I said that a lot of times we have these mindsets that are kind of drilled into our head through society. So I have a big X here, like, no, this is not a good mindset to have because it's a perfectionist mindset. But here's an example of two quotes that just show that we put this out into the universe so that we are getting a lot of messaging as a society that we have to be perfect. The first is passion drives perfection. So if you're passionate about something, you're going to build your way up to perfection. What if I was passionate about something and I'm not very good at it, but I enjoy it? So thinking that passion drives perfection, it kind of takes the fun out of it and the enjoyment out of it because you're doing something that you're passionate about so that you can be perfect, right? Like that's going to have someone end up hating what they do, right? Think of these athletes that get burnt out because something that they love doesn't become fun anymore because they're probably striving for perfection. The second one is be content with nothing less than perfection. Think for a moment there, what's wrong with this one? Be content with nothing less than perfection. That's saying that anything short of perfect's not good enough. We know that perfect's not attainable. So someone's not going to be very content because they're never going to be perfect, right? So this is basically saying strive for nothing less than perfection. And that doesn't set people up for success, right? This just sets people up to have negative self-talk, self-doubt, and not feeling like they ever have achieved because it wasn't perfect. So that's why I have a big X. I do encourage you to, even after this webinar, you just are more mindful when you're out. If you see posters like this, I see it a lot on social media, right? Practice makes perfect. No, that's not true, right? Like you could practice at something and you're never going to be perfect at it. So just changing the way we talk about things and some of the shifts in language will be helpful for changing our mindset shift here to go from perfection to progress, right? Doing our best, having room to grow, that's what's more important. So here are two quotes, statements that I really like, right? The other ones had a big X. These would be green flags. These are good. I love this one. Done is better than perfect because perfect never gets done. And I have presented this to students before, and I had a student come up after and she said, will you send me the slide deck because I need to put this by my study area. She said, because I can't ever know when done is. So I'm just driving myself crazy trying to say, is it perfect yet? Is it done? And she said, but I love this. Done is better than perfect because done means I can move on and I can do the things in my life that are important to me, right? So just sit with this one for a second. Done is better than perfect because perfect never gets done. And then the next one is practice makes progress. So practice doesn't make perfect. Practice means you're bettering yourself. So you're working towards progress, you're making progress. That's what we should be rewarding. And you'll actually see some schools have a movement to not grade anymore, right? It's more on the process and are they learning and are they growing? So it's just interesting some of the stances people take on this, especially in academics. So we will talk about burnout here for a few minutes, and perfectionism often leads to burnout. And you might ask your clients some of these questions, are they feeling exhausted, isolated? Do they have escape fantasies? But we're going to talk about some of the signs and symptoms of burnout. If you see these in your client, you definitely want to talk with them more and see holistically how they're feeling. But a lot of times, sometimes people might not even feel that they're burnt out, right? Oh, I'm just tired. No, you're burnt out, right? So the first symptom to look for is exhaustion, and this would be physically and emotionally depleted. They might not be sleeping well. They might feel like they are sleeping too much, right? So there's either not sleeping enough, sleeping too much, or just feeling like they never are energized, right? Sluggish. I don't feel good. So feeling physically and emotionally depleted, physical symptoms may include headaches, stomach aches, and appetite or sleep changes. And like I said, just feeling like they can never catch up to their normal energy level. The next is isolation. So, when people with burnout hit that breaking point, they tend to feel overwhelmed and just everything keeps piling up. For me, that's how I get, right? I start to isolate. Like, I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to do things. I'm just like, I just want to like lay around and watch Netflix and do nothing. So, as a result, they may stop socializing or confiding in friends, family, and teachers. And this might be a marked shift. You might hear parents say they're really not engaging like they used to. They want to stay in their room a lot more. I've had some teenagers tell me, like, I'll physically hang out with my friends, but I'm so mentally checked out. Like, I'm not really listening to them. She said, it's like I'm like floating above them. So, feeling very disassociated from them. So, that was a big red flag as well. Escape fantasies. People with burnout may fantasize about avoiding or getting out of commitments. So thinking, I cannot wait to not have to go to that thing. Or they start to make up excuses because they don't want to say, I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'm irritable. Oh, I can't hang out. I have to go to my grandma's birthday party, right? They start to make excuses to get out of commitments because it's exhausting and they don't have the energy to put forth to do it. In extreme cases, they may turn to drugs, alcohol, or food as a way to numb their emotional pain. So they're coping in other ways. Drugs and alcohol, I think that we generally are pretty in tune to that. But the food one is one that we don't talk about that much. And this could be in restricting food. So they might be restricting their food, not eating, not getting what they need, or they might be overeating, right? So you might see weight gain or weight loss. So that's definitely something to point out as well if you start to see that. Irritability. I like this picture of the brain that feels all jumbled because sometimes this is exactly how it feels to be burnt out. Your brain just feels jumbled and fried. So, irritability, burnout can cause people to feel on edge, right? They might feel restless or that they have a short fuse. And they might be quick to anger or irritation. So, just feeling like anything anyone says is bothering them, right? Like the person might just be in the room, their presence is irritating. So, things that they were easily able to cope with before have become more difficult and feel overwhelming. So, they might be quick to temper, they might be arguing a lot more, or honestly feeling very negative. And then we talked about this. We know that it's all related, right? Psychosomatic, frequent illness. So burnout can lower your immune system because we need nutrients, we need sleep, we need to have a regulated nervous system. So people that are experiencing burnout might be more susceptible to colds, the flu, insomnia. They just might be feeling like they just generally are not healthy. And burnout can also lead to mental health concerns such as depression and anxiety. So it's really important that we make sure that we are asking our clients about these symptoms and making sure that if they are experiencing this, we are making sure that we can collaboratively with parents, with them, with any other providers, are getting them the support that they need. I love this because I'm a visual person, and this is from an Instagram account, Journey to Wellness. So I do want to give credit there. And I've actually had some clients that find accounts like this helpful. So I have a few clients that are on social media. I mean, there's no avoiding that. So I will make sure that it's appropriate and I will send them to some accounts that I think that would be helpful for them because that is a tool or a coping mechanism that they resonate with. So, what are some signs here? Headaches and muscle tension. For me, I get tension headaches in here, and I'm like, okay, I know something's coming on. Or I get migraines behind my eyes. That's why I have to wear my reflective UV blue light glasses. It's because I'm on my computer a lot, so I was getting such bad headaches because I was at the computer all day. I'm like, I need to try something. Trouble with sleep patterns. That could be sleeping too little. That could be sleeping too much. Feeling overwhelmed and cynical. So, like I said, that negative thinking, everything seems to just bother you. You can't shake it off. You feel like you're just in a negative mindset, right? Like friends might be saying, like, what is wrong with them? Like, why are they so on edge or irritable? You might be frustrated and feeling unfulfilled. Things that you used to find pleasure in are no longer pleasurable. This is a big one. Sunday night blues before work. Obviously, can be school as well. We all know the Sunday scaries are a real thing. But sometimes for students, they will miss school on a Monday because it's so hard mentally and it's so hard to get the motivation to even push forward to go into the week because they're so overwhelmed, right? It's like, oh my goodness, like I want to keep resting my body and recharging. I do not want to go to school. A sense of apathy or over complaining. We talked about this, like just more negative than usual. Like every little thing seems to be a complaint. Nothing seems to be bringing any joy or happiness. Feeling depleted, this was a big one for me. Like I was so exhausted. First, I was not sleeping, so of course I was exhausted. But even when I was caught up on sleep, like just getting through the day was a big hurdle to jump over. And then I played a sport after, so like it was really hard to have the energy to do things outside of even just getting up, going to school, and coming home. And then irritability or losing your temper, having that short fuse. Okay, so we have covered some of the basics of perfectionism, and now we're going to watch a quick video explaining how perfectionism can affect students that comes from the Stanford Learning Lab.
In this Stanford Learning Lab video, we'll discuss perfectionism and the role it can play in academics. Perfectionism in college students can manifest differently. Some might settle for nothing less than straight A's in each course. And while this can be a worthy goal, it can also lead to increasing stress and eventual burnout. Additionally, it emphasizes avoiding mistakes rather than learning from them. Excessively high standards can also lead to struggles in starting assignments because the point of entry isn't reasonable. Imagine writing an essay, but rather than producing a rough draft, every thought needs to be fully formed before you can move on to the next sentence. This can make working highly aversive. But perfectionism is a multi-dimensional construct. Some types are adaptive, while others are maladaptive. In a study of undergraduate students, adaptive perfectionists had better approaches to emotion regulation and showed less chronic stress compared to maladaptive perfectionists, who are more critical of their performance. College students can be particularly susceptible to maladaptive perfectionism because their performance is assessed and critiqued on a regular basis. One factor that is associated with maladaptive perfectionism is higher levels of dichotomous thinking and rigidity. Essentially, maladaptive perfectionists tend to resist the acquisition of new behaviors and show an overdependence on self-evaluation. Some research differentiates between perfectionistic strivings and perfectionistic concerns. Perfectionistic strivings are characterized by self-oriented, excessively high goals. This describes a person whose high standards are self-determined. Meanwhile, perfectionistic concerns are characterized by a focus on the impact of mistakes, feelings of self-worth, and the discrepancy between expectations and performance. Rather than self-oriented standards, perfectionistic concerns are socially prescribed, meaning the high standards are more determined by others. For example, those that reach for high standards set by their parents or peers and are overly focused on social comparisons. Perfectionistic concerns have a medium to large effect on burnout and burnout symptoms. This suggests that those who are overly concerned about making mistakes or negative social evaluations tend to experience higher rates of burnout. When looking at the effect of perfectionism on academic achievement, perfectionistic strivings positively affect academic achievement, while perfectionistic concerns negatively affect academic achievement. However, other research has showed that perfectionistic strivings, as well as perfectionistic concerns, are linked to negative mental health outcomes. So there is some disagreement on whether any variation of perfectionism is truly beneficial. Where there is little disagreement is that perfectionism is on the rise. In a meta-analysis of 164 studies with over 40,000 college students, the rates of perfectionism increased between 1989 and 2016 in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. The authors argue that one factor that has fueled this trend in these specific countries is that they emphasize competitive individualism, in which people respond by striving to perfect themselves and their lifestyles. So what can be done to address this increasing perfectionism in college students? Psychological interventions can be effective, In one meta-analysis, behavioral interventions led to decreases in anxiety, depression, and other negative mental health symptoms. So working with therapists, academic coaches, learning specialists, and other resources on campus can curb these perfectionistic tendencies and subsequent symptoms. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, can also effectively reduce levels of perfectionism and associated distress in college students. CBT would help someone realize perfect outcomes are not required on any given task, and challenge beliefs and biases that support unrealistic standards. However, even after a CBT intervention, some people may be treatment resistant if their perfectionistic tendencies are a core part of their identity. One study with both adolescents and adults found that self-compassion moderates the relationship between perfectionism and depression. In other words, those with high perfectionism and low self-compassion tended to have higher levels of depression, while those with high perfectionism and high self-compassion reported lower levels of depression. Mistakes are inevitable, but self-compassion can help people bounce back and learn from those mistakes more quickly. Complex assignments can often seem daunting and difficult to start, especially if you have very high standards. One tip is to break down that assignment into smaller, more manageable steps that are easier to execute. Sometimes students might hold off on working until their motivation is sufficiently high, but another approach is to simply lower their goal to their current level of motivation. In his best-selling book Atomic Habits, James Clear advocates that you should not raise your motivation to the level of your goals, but rather lower your goals to your current level of motivation. This flipped perspective is very helpful for perfectionists whose high standards prevent them from working when they are not at their best. In their book, When Perfect Isn't Good Enough, the authors put simply, it's only natural to want to avoid making mistakes, but imperfection is a part of being human. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to learn more about perfectionism and academic strategies, please contact the Stanford Learning Lab. Thank you for listening.
Okay, let's pause that to there and move on to our next slide. So you could see from that was kind of a nice summary of everything that we have been talking about so far. And I wanted to point out a few key tips from that video that resonated with me. There was the chart, the Venn diagram of what is maladaptive and what is adaptive. Remember, we are mostly going to be seeing clients that come in that have some of those maladaptive behaviors. And something that was on the maladaptive side that I wanted to point out was avoiding mistakes rather than learning from them, right? A lot of it is I'm going to strive for perfection so that I don't make a mistake, because a lot of times they don't like to sit with that discomfort. They might be conflict adverse, or they might have poor self-esteem. Another thing is, this keeps coming up, is that a lot of times the maladaptive behavior, it boils down to rigid thinking, right? There's that rigidity, that all or nothing thinking, that black or white thinking. So that continues to be another concept that has been coming up throughout our presentation. And what's really interesting is, you've probably heard it in the video, and there's a lot of research out there to second and third and really support this, is that when someone has those maladaptive perfectionist tendencies, it actually negatively affects their achievements. So they are doing the opposite of what they're intending to do. And if you think about burnout and some of those secondary symptoms that we see due to perfection, it makes sense why their academic achievement might be negatively impacted, right? Think of brain power. If we're not sleeping, if we're stressed, if we are burnt out, we're not going to be able to achieve at our highest level. So what we want to work with on clients is helping them see that, right? What you're striving for, this perfection, this really high achievement, by what you're doing, it's actually negatively affecting your path to get there. And sometimes when we reframe it like that for clients, they're able to see that they're not getting to their end goal in the way that they want. So that can be helpful as well. And then lastly, it talked about some interventions, which is where we are going to focus on for the next bit of the presentation. Is, okay, we know about perfectionism. We know what it looks like, how it affects academics. What do we do as clinicians? What are some evidence-based practices that work? And how can we help clients to combat some of these symptoms or these tendencies that they're experiencing? So, here are some tips for combating perfectionism. The first is awareness. We can't help someone if they're not aware. So, becoming more aware of your perfectionist tendencies or our clients' perfectionist tendencies, that's the start. And oftentimes people will say, well, I know I'm a perfectionist, but what do I do with that? I often tell clients to write down some of these behaviors that they have or some of the thoughts that come to their mind when they're doing assignments or working towards a project, and then revisit them. Right? Sometimes just writing it down and putting a pen to paper, it really helps clients become more self aware. Set reasonable goals. We know that perfect is not reasonable. So that's step one, is setting reasonable goals, and being perfect is not one of those. So we want to help clients set a goal with high expectations, but it's not impossible because we know as human beings we are imperfect. So I liked how they said something that's going to match their motivation and be reasonable. And that actually made me think that I want to explore that book, Atomic Habits, because I think it could be very helpful for our work as clinicians with clients. Mindset shift. So we talked about how we see a lot of messaging that tells us to strive for perfection, but we want to help our clients move that mindset from perfection to good enough or perfection to progress. So it's going to take a lot of mindset work, right? We can't just say you need to shift your mindset. It's going to require a lot of thinking on our part. It's going to be a lot of working collaboratively with the client. But once we can get that mindset shift, we start to see some progress in the behaviors. Okay. Self-compassion was talked about as well as an intervention, and that's going to be really important, is being kind to ourselves and letting our clients know that it's okay to show yourself some kindness. Remember that the person who pressures you the most is yourself. I always tell clients this, right? We are hardest on ourselves, and that's oftentimes because we want to strive to be our best, and in this case, sometimes the best. So be kind to yourself and practice self acceptance. Self acceptance is accepting that you will make mistakes. That's part of being a human, it's part of the human experience. So part of that is lowering unrealistic standards that are set for yourself. And notice I don't say lowering standards, lowering unrealistic standards. Because as we've discussed, a lot of times the standards are not even attainable. And then we're kind of on that wheel of just going, and never reaching that final product that we are hoping to achieve. Another thing is asking for help. So if you have a client that has come to you and said, I want to work on this, like, we really want to praise that, right? That's good that they're taking the step and they see that this might be problematic or causing some distress in their life. So if you think perfectionism is affecting your life in a negative way, ask for help, right? A lot of times perfectionists, they hold it all in and it's really hard to ask for help. So praising the step that a client does take to get the help, or if this is you, knowing that it's okay, there are people out there that can help you through this. So this is kind of my tips directly for my students: talk to your parents, friends, or someone at school. And I often tell my students, like, talk to your teachers. They will be happy, as someone that has been an educator and worked in education systems for a long time. It's going to be helpful when a student comes to the teacher and says, this is what's going on, or a student goes to the counselor and kind of describes what's going on. So there's no shame in asking for help, or at least there should not be shame in asking for help. You will often see that teachers really do want to help you work on these skills. I was giving this presentation, like I've said, to some adolescents, and a teacher was sitting in on it as well. And she said, when students come, oftentimes the teachers know, but when a student comes and asks for help, they are usually more than willing to kind of set up a plan or talk about some ways in which they can make goals that are reasonable for that teacher's expectations and for the class. Therapy. I always tell my clients therapy is cool. And therapy can definitely help with anxiety around perfectionism. So, in the video, they discussed at CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, being a really good modality to use with clients. And it can help them with their thoughts and reframing those thoughts. Because a lot of times with CBT, something that we usually say is feelings are not facts. So, helping them reframe their thoughts, put a different spin on it, that can be really powerful. Therapy can also help you to better understand the deeper reason behind feeling the pressure to be perfect. So, a lot of times, this might come down to things that have happened in childhood. It might be social factors. It might be environmental factors. There could be trauma behind there, and there's like a lot of deeper work that can be done. Sometimes perfectionism is just the ticket in, and then from there you can work on a lot of the deeper work and see what life experience have kind of shaped the way this person is and how has that led to some of those perfectionist tendencies. Okay, so we are all here because we're mental health providers and we are hoping to help our clients walk through this. So, how can mental providers help? Help students identify and challenge negative thoughts and beliefs regarding or around their perfectionism. So, like we said, we want to have them verbalize what their negative thoughts and negative beliefs are. And then from there, we want them to reframe or kind of see it from a different perspective. Teaching them coping strategies for managing stress and anxiety. This is kind of a more surface level intervention, right? If they are experiencing stress, anxiety, burnout, what are some coping strategies we can give them? This might be meditation. This might be mindfulness. This might be some grounding techniques or some breathing techniques to just really help them reset and be present. The third is assisting them in setting realistic and achievable goals. And this could actually be something you have them write out the goals that they want and the steps it would take them to get there. And sometimes when we can actually write out and have tangible goals that are visual or verbalizing them and realizing when they're unachievable, there's not steps you can even take to get there because they're unrealistic. What I have also done with clients is I've done a pie chart of how many hours are in a day and say, how much time do you spend on homework? How much time do you spend on this? And helping them see that when you're spending such a significant chunk of the pie on one activity, whether that be school or homework, you're missing out on other areas, right? You have to sleep, you have to eat. And when you're spending such a significant amount of time on schoolwork or projects, you're missing out on other things because there's only 24 hours in a day. I find myself saying that a lot. A lot of times our students are overscheduled. They have so much on their plate, and sometimes relieving the stress is just making things more manageable for them, helping them say no to certain things and helping them find a schedule and finding timing and realistic scheduling that's going to work for them. Number 4, encouraging them to practice self-compassion and to recognize that mistakes and failures are a normal part of the learning process. They mentioned this in the video, right? We should be learning from our mistakes rather than avoiding them. So what this might look like, an intervention that you could do with clients, is having them list times that they have made a mistake or had a setback. And then having them think about, what did you learn from this? Because I think that we always learn from setbacks and mistakes, right? We might not see it in the moment. It might have felt uncomfortable. It might have felt kind of icky or yucky. But what did we in the end learn from that? We talked about this, helping them to develop a balance between their academic and personal lives. ACT therapy can be very good for this, acceptance and commitment therapy, because it's a lot about aligning with your values. So some work that I have done with clients is having them come up with values that are very important to them and helping them see how some of their behaviors either align or don't align with their values. So I've actually had them write out their values, and then we go through each one and talk about it and talk about how is this behavior moving you closer or away from those things that you find valuable. Number 6, support them on developing healthy habits of self-care and self-compassion. We talk a lot about self-care, but some teens, some students, even younger students, they might not know what that means, right? Especially our younger ones, they might see their parents that have maladaptive behaviors, right? Sometimes they have, like I've mentioned, they have parents that are very successful or expect a lot from them. So they might not even know what it's like to have self-care. I've had some kiddos come to me and I'm like, you look so exhausted. And they're like, they name out all the things that they had in that day or that week. And I'm like, you sound really exhausted because you're doing so many things. And we do the pie chart activity. And sometimes our work in session is helping them find their voice to tell a parent or a caregiver that they need a break. A lot of times kids think I have to push myself, I have to do it. And I sometimes say, do you think you've ever told your parents how you're feeling? And then we bring the parents in sometimes, and the parents are like, I had no idea. So sometimes it's helping our clients and our students find their voice and advocate for what they need. The next is 7, provide them with education about the negative effects of perfectionism on their mental and physical health. So, kind of what we're doing here, you could show them some of those images that we had, some of those visuals, and just letting them know about burnout, what it looks like, even showing that Stanford video. I think that could be really helpful, but providing psychoeducation not only to them, you got to think about them in their whole world. Maybe it's helpful to have parents or coaches watch this. I've even done some work where we work with the coach because the coach was putting very intense pressures on the student, and that was causing them to have this unrealistic expectations. Because what does society tell us? Keep working as hard as possible and you will strive and hit perfection. So, what would be an example of identifying challenging negative thoughts? Ask the student to keep a thought diary. This could be really good. So, when negative thoughts come up, jot it down, talk about it in session. Together, we would work on reframing this using a CBT lens and challenging these thoughts by using evidence, right? So, I'll have a client say, I'm a failure because I wasn't the best at this assignment, right? Like maybe my friend got a higher grade. And I said, and what evidence do you have that shows you that you're a failure? And then they think about it and they're like, oh, you're right. So that could be a really good mindset shift for some of your clients. Teaching them coping strategies for managing stress and anxiety. We talked about this a little bit, but we might teach them relaxation techniques. We might send them podcasts or resources for evening time, as they can, because sleep can often be very impacted for those that have perfectionism tendencies. They might be very anxious, or at the end of the night, they might be running through a laundry list of all the things they have to do and thinking, I'm never going to have enough time. I can't go to sleep, and feeling guilty for sleeping or resting, which is something we need as human beings. So we might teach them muscle relaxation, mindfulness, body scan, meditation. We might also teach them how to identify and manage triggers that lead to stress and anxiety. So I'll say, what's a trigger for you? What makes your anxiety increase regarding perfectionism? Like, what tasks do you know are going to kind of bring you to a higher level of discomfort with your regulation? Assisting them in setting realistic and achievable goals. We talked about what that looks like and what that work might look like for us working with our clients. Example here is we might help the student to set SMART goals. So that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, because oftentimes we throw out these lofty goals and they're not SMART based. So it would be really difficult because we cannot measure them, they're not relevant, and they're not achievable. This would help the student develop a plan for achieving these goals and to track their progress. I oftentimes, if clients can have attainable goals and they're tracking their progress and they're seeing they're making right gains, having that tangible data can be really helpful for them. It's like, oh, wow, I did improve by 5%, or I'm getting more sleep now. And that was a goal that I have. And because of this, I'm able to, do other things in my life and not focus so much on studying or project-based things. So SMART goals can be really, really helpful in helping them throughout the process track these goals, adjust as needed, and letting them know that's it. It's just a goal. Doesn't mean that if you don't hit it, that there's something really negative or terrible that's going to happen. It just means we got to readjust. It's always a process. We're always readjusting. Encouraging self-compassion. So we want to help them to develop compassion. We might have them write a letter of encouragement to themselves, right? I've had clients do this, and oftentimes it's really hard for them. They're like, I can give other people encouragement and advice, but I can't give it to myself. Or we might have them imagine a supportive friend or family member. I've had family members write clients some letters of encouragement, kind of to boost the self-esteem, to let them know that there are people out there that think very highly of them. And I always make sure the letters are not around output based, right? Products, right? Values that they love about that person that have nothing to do with some sort of goal that they are looking to hit. Helping them to develop a balance between their academic and personal lives. We've already talked about this. Creating schedules. So just say I might put a Monday through Friday or a Monday through Sunday schedule up and say, fill this out for me, and break it down hour by hour, like, right? Because a lot of times there's not much time for things, right? They have school, they might play sports, then you have to do the basics, sleep, eat, self-care, shower. So this might help the students see that we have to prioritize, right? We can't do everything we want all the time. There's going to be some give and take. There's going to be some pull, and we want to empower them to make decisions that are going to align with their priorities and align with their values. What else can we do? We can support them in developing healthy habits of self-care and self-compassion. We've already talked about this, but we might talk to them about exercise, healthy eating, and sleep hygiene, because we know that that all leads to burnout. And if we are really stressed, I don't know about you, when I'm really stressed, I just want to order out. I do not eat healthy, and I'm definitely not exercising. So letting them know how holistically we're a person and we need to stay active, how activity can actually help us have more energy, how healthy eating ties into mood and well-being, and sleep hygiene is a major one. They also might be on their cell phones, they might be interacting with electronics or on their devices before bed. So helping them come up with maybe morning routines or evening bedtime routines that are going to help their overall wellness and really tie into that sleep hygiene. Like, sleep hygiene is so important. And when they do this, we're trying to develop a sense of, first of all, responsibility, accountability, but we're hoping that they will start to develop self-compassion and have some of that inner dialogue going through their head. Sometimes they'll say, what are you thinking about? What thoughts go through your head? And they've never spoken it out loud, and it can be really powerful for them to say, oh, this is what I actually am thinking. I've never said that out loud. I also have done an activity where I draw just a head and I say, on the inside, write everything that's going on inside of your head that people don't see, right? We always have self-talk. We always have thoughts. And then I said, but write what people see about you on the outside. And then we discuss, do these align or are these different? And that can be really powerful as well. We want to provide them with psychoeducation. We discuss this about perfectionism and how this has an effect on their mental and physical health, and ultimately how what they're trying to achieve can be hindered or limited based on some of the behaviors that they're doing. So we might give them literature. Like I said, sometimes if they're on social media, I link them with accounts that could be helpful. I've encouraged podcasts. Kids love podcasts. Parents love podcasts. A variety of different things, but you want to tailor this to the client's interest. So whatever you think is going to work for them, use that as something that they can incorporate into their routines. We might also discuss the physical effects of perfectionism, talking about sleep disturbances, fatigue, and decreased immune function. So I'm going to ask them questions like, how are you feeling? Like, do you feel well? And sometimes they're like, no, actually, I've like realizing I've had headaches a lot. So then we'll start to track those symptoms and journal about them and keep an eye on them, because sometimes I'll say, we also need to make sure that if they need to get help from a doctor, that we are making sure that a medical professional is part of the process as well. Okay, so that's kind of our wrap up for today's content. Let's go back to our We'll go all the way back to our objectives, and we cover all of these today. So to summarize, what we've done is we talked about the traits of perfectionism, its impact on academic and professional success. We talked about maladaptive and adaptive characteristics of perfectionism. Recognize the signs and symptoms of academic burnout. We talked about what that might look like. We talked about how burnout can look for different clients. Learning strategies for addressing perfectionistic thinking and unrealistic expectations in clients. We talked about that a lot, how we as clinicians can address it, and then also empowering the client. We've given a variety of different tools that our clients can use to help them move from perfection to progress. And what I do want you to do when you leave our webinar today is start to look, like I said, at some of those messages that society puts out on social media and see if you just start to change the way you look at it when you see signs like practice makes perfect, and how our young children and students are internalizing these messages that are put out for them. So we've done that. The fourth learning objective, develop skills for promoting healthy coping mechanisms and resilience. We talked about that. We talked about a variety of interventions that you can use. And what I wanted to say about interventions is that it definitely depends on the client, right? You're not going to do a blanket approach for all clients. There's a variety of different things that we need to consider, how often we're seeing the client, what capacity we're seeing the client, how motivated the client is to change, how bought into the process they are, and the severity, right? Some clients are going to be somewhere on a spectrum of severity, and sometimes there might be other factors playing into this as well, right? So very important to kind of see the client, meet them where they're at, and work from their own strengths that they bring to the table. And then our last learning objective was to examine the role mental health providers play in helping clients overcome perfectionism and preventing burnout. So very important that we are aware of the signs and symptoms. We have some interventions that we can use if we do see clients that are coming in with some of these symptoms, some of these behaviors. But lastly, I want to say, if we're burnt out, we're not going to be able to help our clients. So you want to make sure that if you yourself, if this is resonating with you, self-proclaimed perfectionist here, that you have a handle on it as well, because you can experience a lot of your own anxiety if that is going under the surface and you're working with a client who is very anxious or has perfectionist tendencies. So we want to help our clients overcome perfectionism and preventing burnout. But if we need the help as well, that we're getting the help and the support that we need. So we covered all of those today. We will go to the end for our last minute reminders. So, reminder, in order to receive your CE credit for this, you're going to need to do a couple things. First, you need to watch the webinar in its entirety, and there's going to be an exit survey. The exit survey is really to get your feedback on what you thought of this, and we take this very seriously at Agents of Change. We value your feedback. We want to be putting out content that is applicable to you. So if you have any suggestions, feel free to email us. We are always striving to improve our programming, and we want to have a very diverse catalog of what we're offering to you all. So we definitely look at these. So don't think I'm just going to put some input in and work from there. It's definitely something that we take very seriously. And then there's going to be a post test. So make sure that you complete that. There's going to be a passing grade that you need to get in order to receive your CE credits. And then your CE credits will be delivered after you successfully watch the webinar, complete your feedback, and then complete the post test. So I mentioned that my citations were listed below throughout, but here is the reference list if you're looking to dive a little bit deeper. I definitely encourage you to check out some of the citations that were listed here. I'm also going to pop in the Stanford Learning video. Remember, they also brought up a lot of great studies and a lot of great resources that you can go from there as well. But I think what's really important is just, if this is something that's interested you, find some scholarly literature that helps you develop your own interventions and helps you frame this issue in a way that's going to be meaningful to you. I found myself down the rabbit hole. I could have listed a billion more citations, but these were the main ones that we pulled from for this presentation today. And I want to sincerely thank you for spending your time learning about perfectionism today. I hope that you found some tools or strategies that you can take away when working with clients, really of any age. We talked a lot about academics today, but it can really go so much deeper and farther than that. And if you have any questions, you can always email me at agentsofchangeprep@gmail.com. Like I said, we value your feedback. So if you have a particular topic you're looking for, please reach out, and we hope that you will join us for another learning webinar in the future. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this continuing education course from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or the link in the description to purchase the course and take the post-test. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our unlimited plan. You will get unlimited access to 150 plus ASWB and NBCC approved continuing education courses for one low annual fee. We're always adding new courses. Did I mention we also have 5 free CE credits available too? Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.